everybody, welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. So we're doing another Philip K. Dick story, which is great. It's called Mr. Spaceship, and it was first published in January of 1953 in Imagination magazine. It's a good one. I enjoyed this. I think that they're getting better and better as we're going. Of course, it's not just a pure swing up, right? It'll go up and down a little bit. I do believe overall they're going up and up. He's just getting better. So this story is pretty cool. I don't like the ending, but we'll get to that in a minute. But overall, this story is pretty dang cool. I really enjoyed it. We set up some parameters for judging the Star Trek episodes, which I'm going to bring over here just because I think it's a better way to look at things. It's a little more specific, which I really like. So there's 4 categories that we're going to judge it on. Number 1 is heart. Heart is how good it makes you feel to read it or watch it. How much you like the characters, how much you can empathize with the characters. I've realized I think that Philip K. Dick is always going to do really poorly in this category because his characters aren't really well defined. And honestly, I don't think that that's his point, you know? I think he's an idea person and he's pushing his ideas and he's just bringing in the characters to kind of help facilitate the story. So I don't think he'll do very well at heart. And I've realized that part of what we need to add to our definition of heart is well-defined characters that you can empathize with. And this story does not have those, but we'll get into that a little bit. I think it's just always true for him. That's the only reason I'm mentioning it right now is because we should not be surprised that he just never does well in that specific area, right? They're very two-dimensional. It's hard to tell who's talking, honestly, because they don't have their own voices. And it's not a big deal because the stories do well. So the next category, I believe, is science. Science includes a lot of stuff. It includes things like tactics and, of course, scientific things, right? Anything that deals with the way the universe is built and the way things function. Also, conversations that people might have can fall under science, of course, if they're talking about specific things. I include tactics in this list because sometimes I find that there are plot problems where it's not explained clearly why people are doing the specific things that they're doing. And I do want to keep it pretty strict, you know. I want it to be like military tactics. I'm not suggesting that, like, if a character says they want vanilla ice cream and then when they go to the store they get chocolate ice cream, that's going to fall under science, really, you know. That's probably more of a heart thing or maybe one of the other categories. But science is kind of a weird name for it. We had kind of trouble coming up with the names of these because it's weird to just define the category, right? But they'll grow and change as we go, just as Hart just did when applying it to Philip K. Dick. So science is just technical stuff. We want technical stuff in our sci-fi. It doesn't have to overrun the thing, right? We want the other elements too, but we want science. Another category is philosophy. And I believe Philip K. Dick will just skyrocket in this category, of course. It is discussing big picture stuff, right? Like, why do we exist? And how should humans be treated? And how should we treat other species when we meet them? And big philosophical ideas are very important for sci-fi. So that's our third category. And then the fourth and final category, we also had a hard time naming. We chose mystery as the name. we want a certain amount of awe and mind-blowingness of what we're reading, right? What we're watching or reading or experiencing. It's important that sci-fi makes us really think and wonder, what is out there, and what is the purpose of exploring, and what might we find, what could happen to us. We want that mystery and that fear and that awe of the future. So those are the 4 categories that we're going to use to try to outline stuff in the future. At least I am. So this story, let's go over the story itself. I like to give a synopsis of these stories because I know that not everybody's read them or has access to them. They're pretty easy to find, but that's not really the point, right? So this story, Mr. Spaceship, is about Earth fighting a war with aliens, and the aliens have all these mines surrounding their area. So we can't get to them because of the mines. And the reason we can't get through the mines is because they're alive. They literally use tactics that a living being could develop and use. So they're incredibly difficult to get away from. Like, they don't detonate until they choose to. So they can pursue something, and then when they get close enough, when they decide they're ready, they can explode and destroy the ship, They can work together. So it's very difficult to deal with these living mines because Earth doesn't have anything living except for living creatures, of course. All of their ships are basically drones. They have a computer that runs them, and the computer cannot outwit the mines. Our ships just keep getting destroyed because the mines are too smart. So the lead character of the story gets a brilliant idea. He says, what we should do is make our ships alive. And they're like, well, how would we do this? And he says, we'll put a brain in the ship. And he says, in the beginning of the story, they say, well, there's been brain transplants in both humans and in artificial structures, but never in spaceships. Okay, and that comes up a little bit later where they kind of contradict that, but it doesn't matter. They do say that they've done it before and that they think they can make it work in a spaceship. And the important thing about it for our lead character is that the brain doesn't have consciousness. It has to simply be reacting. Like only the lizard brain is turned on, not the full conscious human brain. It just has to be able to react to situations and make smart choices. So they decide, okay, cool, we're going to give this a try. So they start building the ship. Our lead character does all the designs so that they can build their ship. But they can't figure out who they're going to get to donate their brain. Now, at this point, I started, not quite at this point, I figured because they'd already transferred brains into other mechanical things, I figured that people were kind of living a really long time. So it'd be really hard to find somebody to give their brain because the minute they get old, they just get transferred into something else. But apparently it's not that far along because our lead character had just split up with his wife. They haven't got a divorce. They just separated. But he's watching them work on the ship, and suddenly his boss and his wife show up. His wife works for his boss as well. She is specifically, I think, in the security department where his boss is, but he is an engineer. He designs things. So this head of security is always around. I assume it's his boss. There's got to be some kind of hierarchy there. But his wife really works for him in the security department, I believe. So his wife shows up. He's kind of disappointed to see her because they separated. And she says, I know what we should do. we should find our old professor from college and see if he wants to donate his brain, because he must be super old by now. And he's like, oh, I don't know about that because I know the guy, and it would be really weird to ask somebody that I know to give up their life in order to run a spaceship. I don't think I like that idea. And the head of security is like, brilliant, we're going to ask him. He doesn't even care, right? He's like, that's perfect choice. We'll find out if he's still alive. And he's like, wait, I don't. His boss is like, no, we're doing it. So they find out he's still alive. They go to his house, and the teacher remembers him. The teacher's super old. He's super sick. He's about to die. So he's a perfect candidate. Our lead character is still very nervous about asking him. He doesn't really want to ask him because he knows him and he likes him. But he finally works up the courage. He tells him the whole plan. And the guy says, the old man says, give me all of the plans. Let me look everything over. I'm only looking for one thing. And if I find that that one thing is true, I'll call you and tell you yes. If that one thing isn't true, then I'm going to call and tell you no. So they're like, okay, fine, sounds perfect. They leave their number. They take off. They have a very nervous night where they're wondering what he's going to say. And our lead character is half hoping that he says no because he doesn't want it to be him. And the next morning he calls and says yes. So, okay. They go ahead and go through with everything. They get the brain all installed, and it becomes the day to test the ship. And they don't want to test it on the ground. They want to get way out in space before they turn it over to the brain. So they all get on the ship. Him and his boss and a couple security guys, I think. Maybe one of his employees. I don't know. There's a small group of people. His wife's not on there. It's just a few people from his work. They all get on the ship. They take off. There's a neat thing about the moon. As they're going past the moon, Philip K. Dick describes it as this disgusting, wretched place. And it's covered in factories, and most of it is dug out, so it's not round anymore. And just a really interesting, weird addition to a story, right? Because that doesn't really enhance the story in any way. I guess it shows us that we're in the future, which is cool, you know. But I really appreciated that he took the time to go into that detail about something that's not really relevant. So that was cool. They fly past the moon and they get far enough out and they decide, okay, it's time to try it. Let's give it a go. So they turn it over to the brain. Now, as they turn it over, the pilot asks our lead character, what are all the changes for? What do they facilitate? And the lead character's like, what changes? What are you talking about? And it turns out that the old man had a lot of stipulations about the way the ship was built. And he did it all through the head of security. He didn't ask his former student because he knew his former student would probably object. He went straight through the head of security, who was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't care, whatever you want. And the lead character literally asks him, why did you say yes to that? And he says, because we're putting his brain in the ship, we have to trust him at some point. There has to be a line where we say, okay, you're the boss, right? And he just chose to move that line up a little bit so he didn't catch any grief and made sure that the brain got in the ship. I thought that was pretty cool too. So, as he's looking at all the wiring, he realizes that the brain has complete control. The minute they turn that ship over to the brain, they have no ability to do anything. And they built a system where they can talk to the brain. They have a microphone. So he picks up the mic and he's like, okay, let's just give it a try, see what happens. And he's like, I want you to turn right. And the ship turns right, and it goes pretty well. He's like, oh, great. And then he says, I want you to turn around and head back toward Earth. And the ship turns back, starts going towards the moon. And he says, actually, I want you to land on the moon. And the ship dives towards the moon, but it's going really fast. So the pilot is like, okay, this is too fast. We're going to crash. I'm going to try to turn it off. He goes over to the controls. He does all kinds of stuff. He can't get control of anything. And right before it crashes into the moon, the ship veers up and shoots off toward deep space. And one thing that they established earlier in the story is humans cannot go into deep space because the ships go too fast. It kills them. So they are realizing that they're going to die because as the ship speeds up, it's going to reach a point where it just kills them. So they contact the defense perimeter, which is way out beyond the moon. And they say, we're coming your direction. Is there any way to get us off this ship? We are stuck. And they say, yeah, sure. Just put on your spacesuits, jump out the door. We'll have a ship there to pick you up. We're like, okay, perfect. But before they really get going with putting on their spacesuits, he decides to try to reason with the computer. He tries to talk to it a little bit with the brain. And he says, hey, it's me. You know me. You need to stop. You're going to hurt us. And the voice, there's a speaker, and the brain can literally talk back to them. So they hear this static, and then the brain starts talking in this robotic voice. And it says, is that you? It's so dark, I can't see. And he's like, yes, it's me. We're in trouble. We're going too fast. You're going to kill us. And he's like, oh, I need to talk to you. I want to talk to you about your wife. We need to sit down and have a long talk. And the guys are like, okay, this is crazy. Put on your spacesuit. We're getting out of here. And the other ship, they can see it pulling up next to it so that they can get picked up. So he's like, okay, fine. That's enough. And he puts down the thing and he puts on his spacesuit. They're all standing by the door and they're trying to open the door and it won't open. And he has to pick up the mic and say, please open the door. For God's sake, we're going to die. Open the door. And it opens the door and they jump out and they get picked up and the ship zooms off. So they get taken back to the moon. They get set up with quarters at the moon because they can't leave till the next day. They're stuck on the moon for the night. And there's a part where a bunch of Earth ships surround the ship in order to destroy it. And they're asking, what's your order? What's your order? And they hesitate. They're like, it's a real human. We don't know if we can blow it up. I mean, should we kill it? What's it trying to do? And finally they're like, okay, fine, blow it up. But they're like, it's too late. It's already gone. And it did some weird tactic and left. It doesn't really go in. He says something like, it did this weird Philistine maneuver that we haven't seen for years, but it worked. And I don't know what he's referring to. It's probably something, I guess. I have no idea. So that's okay, you know, like in the science category. I guess that's okay, you know. It doesn't have to tell us exactly what he did to escape. But he did something and he escaped. And it was kind of old school, right? Because it's an old guy. So that's cool. I kind of like that, especially for the science category. So he gets away. And they're like, we shouldn't have hesitated. Dang it. So then they all go to bed. And of course, our lead character can't sleep. He keeps thinking about his old professor. And he's thinking a little bit about his wife. And suddenly he gets a phone call. He jumps up and answers. And they're like, this is the New York hospital. We have an emergency. Your wife has been critically hurt. You need to get here as quick as you can. And he's like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm going to get there. So he hangs up and then he calls, I guess they're like in a hotel kind of place, and he calls down to the front desk. And he's like, I need a ship out of here. And they're like, there's no ships for another 8 hours. You can't leave till tomorrow. And he's like, my wife is sick. What can I do? And they say, well, I could just randomly call out into space and see if there's any ships around that would be willing to take you. And he's like, yeah, great, do that. So he gets dressed real quick, heads downstairs, goes over to the control tower, and they're like, okay, a ship called in. They said they'll take you. They're having some engine trouble, so they're heading back to Earth. And he's like, sweet, great. And he turns around, the ship lands, he turns around, runs out to the ship and gets on board, and he realizes, of course, tiny bit obvious, but it's okay. He realizes he's on the ship. And he's like, oh no, it's you. And the ship's like, yes, it's me. I wanted to talk to you. And then this surprised me. This was cool. He says, you made the call about my wife. My wife's not really hurt, right? And the ship says, you're right. I did that just to trick you so that I could come and pick you up. And that surprised me. I knew that the ship would come to pick him up, but I didn't realize that the ship made the call. That was pretty cool. So he's like, yes, we need to talk. And he says, the ship, the old man says, I have realized that we have been fighting wars for most of my life and all of your life, and it's become a habit. I do not believe that humans fight wars because it's in their genetics. I believe that it just started randomly, and over time it's become a habit. And if we could raise people correctly, they would not have that habit. So what I want to do is I want to find a planet that the humans don't care about, but can sustain life. And I want to put a colony there, and I want to raise them in order to not be warlike. And I believe that by the second generation, I should be able to have enough influence to find out if it's in their genes or if it's just a habit. And the guy's like, well, that sounds all fine and good, but what about the first generation? They are warlike. Where are you going to get all these people? How are you going to create a colony? And he says, well, I have that figured out. Let me show you. And a door opens and his wife is there. And she's like, what is going on? Why are we here? Why are you here? I thought you were hurt and in the hospital. I was trying to get to the moon. What is happening? And the computer explains that they could take care of it. The reason I put it that way is because the wife doesn't know. She's not in on the plan. So the guy is like, wow, you're right. We could do this. Let's do it. And she's like, where are we going? And he's like, I don't know where we're going, but it's going to be great. And he gives her a hug, and she melts in his arms and cries, and they decide to get back together. And that's the end. So there's a couple things I don't like about the ending of the story, but overall, I really had a good time. Like for mystery, I think the mystery was pretty high. I didn't like the reveal, and that is really common, right? If you go watch a monster movie, right? Like Alien. You go watch Alien, right? You don't see the alien really see it until right at the end. You can see glimpses of it, right? Shadows of it or pieces of it. But you don't see the whole thing until the very end in that strobe light, right? And if it looked stupid, which it doesn't, it was very successful. But if it looks stupid, you might hate the movie. And I want to create a separation about that, right? If the movie's fun until you see the monster, you don't need to hate the movie, right? You just need to hate the end. That's okay. The monster looked dumb, but man, I had fun, right? This was a really fun story, but the reveal right at the end was a bit of a disappointment because I was really wondering, what was the old man looking for? What was the one thing that he wanted to see? And it turns out, I think they explain this. I think Philip K. Dick brings this across pretty well. I don't think I'm filling in the blanks. I believe he was looking for whether or not he truly would lose his consciousness. Could he rework it so that he could truly have control of the ship and he could keep his consciousness? So I think that's the one thing he was looking for, which is okay. You know, like I said, the ending's kind of a disappointment. That's okay. Um, the Adam and Eve thing, I don't go for that at all. At all. Like two people creating a population, which literally means she's going to be pregnant the entire time, and then they're going to make their kids have sex with each other, right? Or maybe the dad will have sex if they only have girls, or maybe the kid. I mean, oh my God, like it's a horrible nightmare, is what that is. Two people trying to create a population. They'll all be genetically a mess, right? I mean, that's a disaster. And I don't know why. I'm not sure. I don't know if Philip K. Dick was religious. I don't believe he was. I'm not sure. I don't know where all that came from, but that was just a mess. And the fact that the wife has no idea what she and her children are going to be in for. What kind of a planet are they going to settle on? Does she enjoy her career? She might, right? I don't know. I mean, honestly, that the ending was just a mess. But the story was really good. I enjoyed everything up until that point. I just think that the reveal was bad. So we already talked about heart, right? The heart's going to be really low for Philip K. Dick, because he just doesn't develop his characters well, which is fine. For philosophy, I really liked the philosophy in this a lot more than in our previous story, where they were just talking about how there's a finite amount of wars. All you got to do is get through that amount of wars, and then you'll never have a war again. Hey, right? Which is total ludicrousy, right? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. But this kind of makes sense to say, if we can just educate people from the get-go to love each other instead of finding enemies to make sure that we get elected, right? We don't need to get everybody on the same page before an election by picking an enemy and focusing everybody on that, you know. If we can do it right, we just won't have wars. And I think that philosophically speaking, that's great. I really enjoyed that. So philosophy-wise, I think I'd give this a 10. I think that's really interesting and fun. It's cool, you know. And they talk a little bit about if you've got a human brain inside of a ship, can you blow up the ship? Right? And that's cool because they don't use pilots, right? Everything's computer run. This is their first living ship, right? As if there was a pilot in the cockpit. And they have a moral quandary about blowing that up, and I think that that's really cool as well. So I'd give this a 10 on the philosophy. For science, I kind of like the science in this. I'm okay with it. The genetics, and maybe that's where this should take the hit, to be honest, right? Because the genetics, I mean, that's just so bad. So maybe we'll go like a 5 on the science. Okay, you're putting a brain in a ship. You can't go too fast or you'll kill the humans inside the ship, right? There's some neat scientific ideas, but that one massive blunder at the end is just too much, way too much. So I'm going to go like a 5 with science. And then for mystery. So I think this had some good mystery. I did not like the reveal, but I think it had some good mystery. I'm going to go probably with a 7 on the mystery. Like, what is the one thing he was looking for, and where are they going when they're flying out into space? Turns out, of course, they're just looking for a planet that's habitable that the humans don't care about. So the reveal wasn't great, but the mystery was pretty good. So I'm going to go with a 7. So if we don't count heart, because the world loves Philip K. Dick, and there's a reason they do. It's not because of his characters. So Hard is just out. Let's just go with three categories for him. So we've got like a 5 and a 10. And then for science, I just forgot what I said. Did I say like a 7? I think I said for science. Yeah, that's cool. So 10, 5, and 7. So out of 30, you got 23. So that's pretty good, I would say. Overall, I'd give this story probably a 7, maybe even an 8. It's just that ending is so bad. So maybe a 7, a good 7 overall, with our individual scores being a 7, a 10, and a 5, I think is what I said. So, yeah, this was pretty fun. I feel like it was still really positive, like the last story, which is just fine, but it was tempered a little bit. You know what I mean? The last story was so positive. This one, humans are in eternal war, and they're going to be for a long time, and we just, they're just trying to make a little colony where they can try to forget all that. And that's kind of dark and interesting and cool. So it's a good one. I enjoyed this story a lot. Of course, there's plenty more to come. We're only up to 53. My brother was remarking about that, saying that it's crazy that we're reading such early stuff before he really gets in the swing of things, you know what I mean? But these stories are not bad. I really am enjoying reading them, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the growth. I want to see what happens once Vietnam starts, what happens to his writing as we go forward through history. The 60s get a little bit different. I'm sure he's going to start experimenting with drugs and all kinds of stuff, and we'll see where that takes us, There's going to be these weird jumps, I believe, in his creativity and his ideas and his cynicism. He's going to grow, and we get to see that through his stories, which I think is great. All right. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, click the like button. If you want to see more, definitely subscribe. We got a ton of older stuff, and we got a ton of newer stuff coming. We're just cruising along. It's not going to stop. So thanks so much. Have a great day.